Today we're going to solve the FizzBuzz coding challenge, and I guarantee we're going to show you one way that no one has ever shown you before. Okay, today we're going to tackle the FizzBuzz coding challenge. Now, FizzBuzz is a common coding challenge employers give to prospective people that they're looking to hire. And they may ask them to whiteboard it, or you may have to code it out in person during the interview. Either way, I'm going to show you 4 ways to solve this. And you can use them in various situations. You can use it on your GitHub, your portfolio, or in a whiteboard challenge. Now, we're going to follow the method we teach here at Coder Foundry, which is solve, talk, show. Now, solve is what we're going to show you is the actual process of coding the solution and solving it. And then we're going to teach you how to talk about the solution as you're coding. And this is super useful in a whiteboard situation. And then we're going to show you how to show or how to demonstrate that, how to use FizzBuzz in a real world scenario. But if you stick around, I'm going to give you one super secret hot tip on how you could use FizzBuzz to win a job. So stay with me and let's get coding. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you 4 techniques to solve the FizzBuzz coding challenge. And if you hang around, I'm also going to show you how to demonstrate how the FizzBuzz works, or how we could show that to an end user. And then we're going to talk about what are the scenarios where all 4 of these solutions could be used, and how should we use them. And finally, if you stick around, I'm going to give you a super secret hot tip on how to use FizzBuzz to win the interview. Anyway, let's talk about what we're going to build today. So let's check this out. So we're going to build a simple website utilizing only HTML and JavaScript and a little bit of CSS. And I'm actually going to give you the CSS. So just today, we're going to focus on HTML and JavaScript to solve FizzBuzz. And so you may be asking your question, what is FizzBuzz? And you can see right here, I've got a description of what it's called. It says, write a program that prints out the numbers from 1 to 100, but for the multiples of 3, print Fizz. Instead of the number for the multiples of 5, print Buzz. For numbers which are multiples of both 3 and 5, print Fizz Buzz. So let's look and see how this would work. So here we're going to accept inputs, and I'm going to show you today how we could do this for any number. But today we're going to focus on 3 and 5 because that's the most common implementation of the FizzBuzz challenge. So I'm going to hit this and hit Buzz it. And you can see right here what it did was it printed out the numbers between 1 and 100. And if you look at it, 1, 2, and 3. And 3 is divisible, is in multiples of 3, and so that gives you Fizz. 4, and then if you get to 5, 5 is a multiple of 5, that gives you Buzz. 6 is a multiple of 3, 3 times 2 is equal to 6, and that's Fizz. 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. Okay, and you get all the way up to 15, and we know that 5 times 3 is 15, so that we print Fizz Buzz. Okay, so let's look into the code and see how we're actually going to build this. And so today we're going to use VS Code to build this solution. So I'm going to start a VS Code solution here. And if you don't know anything about VS Code, it's a highly used editor by Microsoft. It's called Visual Studio Code. And I've got some folders already put up here. And so right here, I'm going to have my FizzBuzz tutorial is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to open this folder. And I've got FizzBuzz tutorial today. And in here, I'm just going to select this folder because everything inside of VS Code works off folders. And I've already got a couple of files in here as it comes up. I've got the logo and I've got a style sheet. And like I told you before, I'm going to give you these 2 pieces of code. Now, one thing you may want to know is if you show this to somebody and you just totally copy my code, you could probably be a good thing to do is to change this logo out with something else or remove it entirely. It's just HTML. So be smart, just make it your own, put your name up there, put your website to your portfolio or something like that, or integrate just this section in your portfolio. But don't just give it with the coderfoundry.com here. I just did that for me. So make it your own and own this, and let's learn this together, okay? So what we can do is we know that absolutely what we're going to need is a JavaScript file. So I'm going to make a JavaScript file, and I'm going to name it FizzBuzz. I'm going to call it FizzBuzz.js. And if I spell it right, there we go. And the other thing that we'll need is an HTML file to show this. So I'm going to make another file for now, and I'm going to call it index. And so that's what we really need to set this up. So now we have a FizzBuzz JS, we've got our logo, we've got our index, and we've got our styles that were pre-programmed here for you. And you can get that from our Git if you look at the links at the bottom of the video, or go to our public GitHub page and you can find this tutorial code with some other tutorial code that we're pushing out. So that's all we need. So let's get started and solve FizzBuzz. So the first thing that we want to do is we're going to use a function. And like I told you before, we're going to create 4 versions of this. So I'm going to write the traditional solve, the one that most people do. So I'm going to put a comment in here. And I'm just going to say traditional solve for FizzBuzz using a loop. Okay? And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a function, and you can see here that Visual Studio Code's giving me some helpers here, which is kind of cool. And we're going to call this function FizzBuzz A because we're going to make 4 of these, and it's going to take values. And so, like, if you don't know what this is parameter driven. And so this is another hot tip that you can show your knowledge of, is like having parameters in functions. And so this is a really good thing to do. Instead of just hard coding 3 and 5, actually your end user could send any 2 numbers and this would work. And that's the way we want to make this work. Okay, to end a function, we need to have some brackets. And you can see here I've got a bracket for opening the function and a closed bracket for closing the function. And what I need is I'm going to return a string. This function is going to return a string, so I need a variable to do that. So I'm going to declare a variable called return value. And I'm going to set that equal to an empty string. And as you know, in JavaScript, everything must end with a semicolon. And so like this is basically saying that this return value has an empty string and it's ending there. So that's all that is. It's just a variable declaration. So the next thing that I need to do is print out the numbers between 1 and 100. So 1 and 100 is, the way we can do that is utilize what we call a loop. And if you haven't used a loop before, it's fairly easy to do. And I'm going to go through the 3 parameters inside of the loop declaration so you can understand what's going on. So the first thing we need to do is declare a for loop. So we just write the word for, okay? And then we're going to open our bracket. And then I'm going to say let I equal 1. What this is saying is we're going to start at 1, okay? And then I'm going to say pretty much while, or when do I want this loop to end? And I'm going to say as long as I is less than or equal to 100, I want you to keep on looping. But every time you loop, I want to add 1 to I. And that is how you define a loop. Pretty easy. Again, we put brackets in here to show the code that we want contained inside of this. So we're scoping with these brackets what happens inside of this loop. So to go over it again, we start at 1, and then we're going to say, well, it's less than or equal to 100, loop around. That means execute the statements in here again, but keep up a counter so that we know that we only do it 100 times. So every time this loops, it'll start out as 1, the next time it'll be 2, the next time it'll be 3, so forth and so forth until I is equal to 100, and then it'll stop executing the code inside this loop. Okay, so the one thing that we need to figure out here is what do we need to do in order to determine if 3 is divisible, or if the number is divisible by 3, or if the number is divisible by 5. And there's a thing called the Modulus Operator, and it looks like this. So if, and we're going to make another thing called an if statement here. So that means that if this is true, do this, else do something else. And so we're going to check the value of the modulus of 3 by the current number that's being looped around. So remember that our number is being incremented every time. So the first time through, I will be 1, it'll loop around, and I will be 2 the second time around. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So each time it loops around, we want to check to see what the modulus of the value is. And what modulus says is, when I divide the number by the other number, the value, like 3 being passed in, is there a remainder? And if there is a remainder, it's not divisible by it. If it has a remainder of 0, it is divisible by it. In other words, 3 divided by 3 equals 0. 3 divided by 6 equals 2, and there is no remainder. If you divide 3 by 5, that's going to give you some number and a remainder. Okay, so we need to check to see if the modulus of these two numbers, I and value 1, equals 0. And how we do that is we use an equal equal. Now, equal equal in JavaScript is meaning that compare these two values and tell me if it evaluates to true or false. It's not setting it to equal, it's checking to see if I modulus value 1 is the return value of that statement equals 0. It's a big difference. It's not equality, it's setting to see if they are equality. It's not setting or assigning a value to it. If you want to assign a value to it, then that would be equal. Hopefully that makes sense. Now we also need to check to see if it's also divisible, the second number is also modulus 0. And so we can do this right here by doing this, percent value 2 equal 0. All right, so what we're checking here is if, and we'll put our scope in there, if 3, for example, if the value of I is divided by 3, divisible by 3 equals 0, and if it's also divisible by 5, we want to return a value called Fizz Buzz, and this is what this does. Okay, so let's set the return value equal to, and we're going to say a plus equal here. And then what that means is that we're going to do this in a loop, and that's we're going to do this incrementally. So every time we want to add to the return value so that we end up with one long string. And plus equal allows us to take the current value, return value, and add something to the end of it or append to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that this should print out Fizz Buzz. Just like that. Now, because I'm putting this in a string, I'm going to add a little space here so that we don't have them all jammed together, so we can see some spacing. So it makes it a little bit more readable. Okay, so let's review what we've done. We've got a loop here, and we're going to loop over this 100 times because we start at 1, and we check to see if I is less than or equal to 100, and then we increment I every time. We modulus these using the Modulus Operator to check to see if it has a remainder of 0, either I by 3 or I by 5 equals 0. If both of those are 0, return Fizz Buzz. Okay, but we're not done yet. Sometimes a number is only divisible by 3, and sometimes it's only divisible by 5. So for example, 3 would return Fizz and 5 would return Buzz. So we need to handle that case as well. So the first thing we did is check to see if they're both divisible. If not, we're going to do an else. Else if, and what I'm going to do here is put a new thing here. If I modulus value 1 equal 0, do this. And what I want to do is in here is I want to say, okay, that must return plus equal Fizz. And so what we're checking here is value 1. In the case of the default values, it's going to be 3. So if when this gets to 3, it'll say if I is equal to 3, it'll be 3 modulus 3. That will equal 0, and it'll return Fizz. Okay. Now we also need to put a space around this as well, so that they're not kind of jammed together, just for formatting purposes. Else if, and then I'm going to take I percent value 2. And this time I'm going to check the 5 in the case of the default values here, and I'm going to return buzz. Okay, and I'm going to say return value equals or plus equals buzz. I'm going to put a little space on it, semicolon. And finally, what we need to do is we need to show just the number. If none of these options are true, we just want to print out the number. So in the case of 1 and 2, they're not divisible by any of these numbers. So we need to print out just the number that's in the loop. So in that case, our default would be an else. That means if none of these are true, complete this statement below, and we're going to say return value equals or plus equals I, and I'm going to add a space to the end of it just so we have some room. That. And then at the very end of this, our function must have a return statement, and we're going to return value. And that, my friends, is how you solve FizzBuzz with a traditional using a loop. Now, what we've talked about in the earlier part of the program is we're talking about like how we demonstrate this to potential employers. And so we have a method called show or solve, talk, show. Solve is what we just did. I wrote the function on the screen for you, and I talked about while I was doing it, explaining what each of these statements did. So I talked about it, and I've solved it, I've talked about it, and now I want to show this to my end user. And so what we're going to use is a web page to do this. And so like one of the things we need to do is go over here to a web page, and we need to write out some HTML. And so our HTML will be pretty simple. But if you're using Visual Studio Code, this is going to mock up some stuff for me. It allows me to do it. And so what I need is a doc type HTML, and then I'm going to make an HTML tag. And, I need to add some language equals English. Since we're here and where we're at. And I need some meta tags, and I've got some meta tags in here. And I'm going to copy some code here so we don't type it all out. I'll go through these real quick. So it's just some viewport things, so it's a little bit scalable. And then I've got a title in here that says how to FizzBuzz. I'm also referencing here my FizzBuzz.js, my script tag here. And so this is how you reference JavaScript files from HTML. And you can see here that they're all in the same folder, so that I just can really type in FizzBuzz.js. If you have a folder structure, you have to represent that here in the source tag. And I'm also doing the same thing with my style sheet. And I'm linking to my style sheet, and I called it style.css. You can name it whatever you want. Okay, so that's kind of cool, and that just sets up what we need to do, and that's all inside of our header tag, which I didn't do. Okay, so I need to put the head tag in here. So if you've been doing HTML for a while, this should be pretty familiar to you. Okay, the next thing we need to do in a HTML thing is a body tag. And this is where our markup's going to go to show what we're going to do. So the first thing you noticed, if you remember what we looked at, is I had a logo at the top of the screen. So let's go ahead and add our logo back in. So we can do that with an image tag. And we give it a source, and here Visual Studio Code shows me that I already have something in my folder here. It found it for me. Now this is what you just have to trust me on, and you can look at the style sheets that I've created for you if you want to. And I've got a class called responsive, and what this is doing is allowing me to make sure that my logo scales as the web page gets smaller, things like that, as it gets bigger or smaller. Okay, so pretty simple. And so the next thing we need to do is we need to put in a div class here. And we're going to use a div, and I'm going to put a class on it called rev style. And again, all of this, I forgot my end tag here. Let me end this up here. And I'm going to give it a name of rev style, okay? And this is just the part of the CSS I provided for you to give it that orange look, and kind of out of scope for this. You can use this for your project if you want to. And the next thing I want to do is I want to have a heading that tells the user what this program's going to do. And I think that's always a good thing, is to remind the user what the program does, especially for coding challenges. And that way you can demonstrate that you know what it's supposed to do. And the end user using it can also figure out, like, well, hey, what's this app do? So it's pretty simple, and something that we should always do. So I'm going to make another div. And I'm going to give it a class. And it's going to be called rev style heading B. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a description for this. And I'm going to cut and paste this from a description that I have, so we don't have to do this. Okay, so now that I just put some text in there. And so what I'm also going to do is now get the buttons and everything going on here. And what I need to do is ask the user to maybe enter a number, like 3 or 5. We're also going to default it as well. So what I need here is, because of the way my style sheet's written, I'm going to use a label. And I'm going to use a span inside of this label, a span tag. And inside the span, I'm going to say enter a number. And then I'm going to, after this in the label, I want to say an input. And I'm going to use an input for this. And the input is so we have a control for them to actually type the number into. And my input will have an ID. And we're going to call this ID is Fizz value. Now, IDs uniquely identify the controls on the page. And this allows JavaScript to look up the control by the ID, and we'll see how we'll use this in a second, so they can interrogate its values, read its values back in the JavaScript side. So all the controls that you want to access from JavaScript, from HTML to JavaScript, need to have an ID on them. All right, so I'm also going to give this a type, and the type is number. Okay. And again, Visual Studio Code is helping me here, and I'm going to just give it a name for fun. Fizz. And I'm going to give it a value. And the value allows me to set a default. And so every time this page is reset, I'm going to give it a value of 3. And that's it. And that's our label span, and that's what we've got the first one we're going to do. Now we're going to do this one more time. And what I'm going to do is enter another number, and this will be our buzz value. So I'm going to hit another label, and I'm going to create another span. And I'm going to say enter another number. Let's make these lowercase. I think it looks better lowercase here. Okay, and then inside this label, we also need a input, just like before. And we need an ID here, just like before, because we're going to access this from JavaScript, so it needs something that we know the name of, and it's going to be buzz value. So we have the fizz value, and we also have the buzz value. The type is also number. The name is equal to buzz, and its value is equal to 5, and that's our defaults. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Again, you can get the code from our GitHub, and if you're not following along, but hopefully you're coding along with me. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to put a button that the user clicks on so that it will call our JavaScript and execute that function that we wrote. Okay, so let's make another label. And then I want to make another span. And I'm going to make this an empty span. And if you look closely in my CSS, this is so that I did this so that they would line up correctly. And this is one way I made it line up correctly. Could be other ways to do it, but this is how I did it in CSS. So for now, we need to input an onClick event. We'll cover that in a second. Let's just stay with what it is. So it's going to be the type equals submit. And this is a type of button it is, and then I'm going to have a value, and then the value in this case on a button on type submit is what's displayed on the button itself. It could say okay or whatever, but we're going to say buzz it, and that is what it's going to say on the front of our button. You can make this say anything that you want. Okay, and then that's our label, and we got our span, and now let's look at our label and where our results will be displayed. So we need a place for when we hit buzz it and we go call our JavaScript and it returns that string that we created in that JavaScript function, is that it will actually be displayed on the page. So we need a place for that to hold, a placeholder for that. Okay, so we need a label so people know what it's going to be called. We need a span tag. You can follow along here. And inside the span tag, we're going to call this results. Results. And then after this label, I just did a really simple breaking tag. Okay? And that's going to create a line, a character return, and then I'm going to create a paragraph tag. And I'm going to give it an ID equal to results. And this is so JavaScript can find this paragraph tag and write the results from our JavaScript function right there. All right, so now that we've finished our HTML, and so now we need to see if this works. So what we can do here is, if you've installed all of the things, we can have a go live. And this go live allows us to run our code. And you can see here, I'm going to pull it over here, run on my other monitor here. You can see what we've done. This is the work of what we've done. It says write a program that prints the numbers from 1 to 100, but for the multiples of 3, print fizz instead of the number. And for the multiples of 5, print buzz. For numbers which are multiples of both 3 and 5, print fizz buzz. And so we do that. Now nothing happens. Okay, so what we need to do next is, how do we wire this up? And how do we call our actual function? Okay, so let's put that to the side for just a second. And let's close this down. And let's go back to JavaScript. And so now back in JavaScript, we've got a function here, but we need to learn how to call it. Now, one of the things that I want you to do is, and this is going into the show method, we wrote a function that solves it. But what I want to do is write another function that actually does the work of showing it. And this is called a little bit of like separation of concerns. And so that our logic is going to be contained in here. And this isn't completely true because we do have some spaces in here for the purists. But for the most part, this is contained in our logic. And so that we want to write another function that allows us to display what we want to do. Okay, and so this is another way that that you can show how to make this work, and it also shows a little bit more thought and programming inside of what you're doing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is write a function, and I'm going to say call and use our Fizz Buzz. And this is going to be our display function or our show function, and I'm going to call it BuzzIt. And I'm going to call buzz it. Doesn't take any parameters. Let me just scroll this up a little bit so we can see what's going on here. And for now, what we're going to do is create a string for the output. So let output, and this can be called anything. I called it output, and I'm going to empty string that. Okay. Now, the next thing that we need to do is find the actual values that the user entered on the screen. And so this is easy enough done. And so we're going to create another variable called val1, and it's going to be equal to this, which is document. And this is a JavaScript thing that allows us to look at the current HTML document, and then I'm going to get it by its element ID. Remember then we add the ID to each one? And I'm going to pass the element ID's name, and I'm going to call it Fizz value dot value. Now what that's doing is it's looking at the HTML document, it's running through the document, and it's finding an element called Fizz value and looking up its value. So if we go back over here and look at our HTML, we can see that this first input tag is called Fizz value, and that's how those are kind of wired up. Now notice too that the naming and case sensitive is a factor, so make sure that you name the things exactly the same, including the case. It's very case sensitive in that case. So this will trip up a lot of early programmers where they don't know why it doesn't work, and it's because they have their capitalization wrong. Okay, so hopefully we've got ours spelled right here. We also need to get the second value. And we'll do the same thing. We'll go back to our document, and we'll say get element by ID, and we're going to call it, we're going to go after the buzz value. Dot value. Okay, so again, we'll go over here and look at our HTML, and we'll see that this has the buzz value right here. It's capital B, lowercase b. We'll go back over here, buzz value, and that is correct. So now what we have is we've got the two values that the user entered on the screen. Now what we need to do is we need to call our FizzBuzz A function. And you can probably guess by now how we do that. So what we want to do is call it, and we also know that this function returns a value, and so we want to set our variable of output equal to the return value of this function. And so how we do that is just say output equals FizzBuzz A. Okay, and we also need to pass it values, and you can see here it's showing us like there's some value 1 and value 2. And so we're going to type in value 1, comma, value 2. And that's it. And so again, to rehash this, this value 1 came from the document where the user entered the value. And we investigated that document using this function here, get element by ID. We referenced it by its name, and it placed the value right here in this variable called value1 or val1, and then we passed val1 to our FizzBuzz function called FizzBuzz A. And this is called a parameter, and we're using parameterized functions now, which is most people don't use parameterized functions when they're using FizzBuzz, so this usually will set you apart from anyone else. So how do we get the output to work? Well, we can go back to the document, and we can get the element ID of results. Remember when we said that paragraph tag and we called it results? And this time we can set the value. Instead of getting the value, we're going to set the value. And we're going to use something called inner HTML is output. And that inner HTML value is equal to our output. So let's go over this real quick. So we went to the document. We went to and looking through it by element ID, looking for the element called results. If we go over here to our index, this P is called ID equals results. Notice it's all lowercase. We reference it all lowercase here. There's a function here or a method or property here called inner HTML, and we're going to set that equal to output, which is the return value from Fizz Buzz A. And hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so this is, we're almost finished wiring this up now, so if you're hanging with me, we'll get to show this on the screen. Now the next thing that we need to do is come back over here, and we need to wire up this button and call that function. So how you do that is we're going to use an event handler called onClick. So when the user clicks it, call the function BuzzIt. Make sure you put your parameters in there. And let's look in our JavaScript here to make sure that's what we called it. It's lowercase, BuzzIt. Okay, that's what I thought. Now, you may be asking yourself, like, how did it find the actual JavaScript file to call? And remember, if you remember correctly, up in here, we're referencing this JavaScript file right here. And that's how this HTML page knows about this function, because it's referencing this JS file. And BuzzIt is a function in this JS file. Okay, so let's go live here and let's run it and see what happens. Hopefully it all works. So again, this came up and you notice that we have 3 and 5 and we can hit BuzzIt. And look at that, we have now completed Fizz Buzz and it actually works. So we can know that 1, 2, and then 3 should be Fizz, because 3 divided by 3 is 0. 4, 5, 5 divided by 5 is actually 0, so it should be Buzz. 6, 3 divided by 6 is 2, so that should be what the return is there. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, because we know that 15 is actually divisible by 3 and 5. So that's great. So it totally 100% works, and we're real proud of that, and that's great. So this is usually what most people do. Now, I can tell you this, is that if you're showing an HTML page with JavaScript, parameterized functions, you're probably ahead of the game. Most people don't do this. They'll use the console to show it. But if someone said do this overnight, or you want to put this on your portfolio, or you want to have a GitHub, you'd want the user some way to run it. So this is a really good method to show them. You also could whiteboard the HTML page and still write the 2 functions in a whiteboard session is what I would recommend. Show them your UI on the whiteboard, and then show them how you call the button and wire them together. So this is probably what I would call the traditional solve. But what if we wanted to make it just a little bit better? Because at Coder Foundry, what we try to do is show the best way to do something, or what we think is the coolest way to do it, all right? And so, as I promised, I've got 3 more ways to show you how to do this. So let's look at a better way to do it with a loop, okay? So let's write a new function to do this in a better way. So we're gonna call this Fizz Buzz B. And our function will take a value from our input, and that's from our screen. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set up our return value, just like we did in the previous function. And we are returning a string here, so we're going to set it to an empty string. Now, what we're going to do a little bit different here is we're going to declare a new variable, and this is a Boolean variable. And a Boolean variable holds the values of true or false. And we're going to initially set this to Fizz equal to false. And then we're also going to create one called Buzz, another Boolean variable called Buzz, and we're going to set it equal to false. So as you know, before we need a loop, so let's declare a loop. And so if you remainder, so let I equal to 1. We want to start at 1, and as long as I is less than or equal to 100, keep looping, and then every time it loops, add 1 to I. And so we've got our loop established here, and so this is where it's going to get a little bit different. Now, as you can see before, we were investigating this modulus 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And so we kept repeating this code over and over again, and we don't want to do that. We only want to do this as least amount of times as possible, and that's the goal of this method for FizzBuzz. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the value of fizz based on the modulus operation. So I'm going to say fizz equals I, which is our number in our loop, modulus the value 1 that the user typed in, and then I'm going to check to see if that operation equals 0. So let's look at what's going on here. Let's scroll up so we can see. This will return a remainder or 0, and this actually will equate to true or false if it has a remainder. If it's a 0, it will not. Also, this statement right here, equal, equal, is testing for equality. It's not an assignment statement. It's saying, is the operation here, the remainder of this, equal to 0? And all of this gets pushed back down into true or false. So this whole thing will compile to a true or false statement, and it'll say is modulus value 1 equal to 0, and that will return either true or false. And we'll use this Boolean fizz here to determine what should we display on the screen. We also need to do that for buzz, and it's very similar. We're going to check it equal, equal to 0. And so now we can check the fizz and the buzz value. Now what we can do to use this is we can use a new thing called a switch. And we can say switch case, and we're going to switch if this is true. So if any of these following statements, any of our cases are true, execute the code. Okay? So our first case that we want to investigate is fizz. And remember, these are Booleans, so is fizz true and is buzz true? And we use a colon here and then a bracket. If that's true, execute this code inside these brackets. And what we're going to say is our return value plus equal is going to be fizz buzz space semicolon. Okay? And then in this case here, we've got to put a break statement in here. And the break statement will allow us to get out of the switch case, hit the next loop, and loop over. So we don't want to test any more after this condition is met. But we do have other conditions that must be met. So let's write our next case. And let's just check just the fizz value. Okay. And if that's true, return the value, set return value plus equal. Remember, we're appending to the string as we go. And that's going to be fizz. Put a little space in here so it doesn't line up. And then we also always need to break. If you forget your breaks here, it'll test any cases below it. So it needs a break for it to work properly. And so we'll check the next one is buzz true. And we'll hit its return value. And we'll hit a break. And finally, if none of these are true, we want to execute where we just want to return the number. So if fizz and buzz are both false, fizz is false, buzz is false, we want to do what we call the default case. And what you can do in here is just use the default keyword here, and it'll say default. And in other words, if all else fails, run this following code. And we want to set the return value plus equals, and we just want to return the number, which is I, but we'll go ahead and add a space in here, semicolon, and then we'll hit a break. And so that's our switch case. And this replaces this if then else that we had before. Essentially does the same thing, except we're testing these Boolean variables here instead of evaluating those modulus operations every time. It's a little bit more efficient. And finally, when the loop is done, we need to return our return value. And that should work for us. So let's go down here and let's change our function call here to make sure we use FizzBuzz B. Okay, save it. And we will go live here and just see kind of what happens. It should work fine. Okay, so let's see what it looks like. So we got our default values 3 or 5. This is the HTML we've been working on. I'm gonna hit buzz, calls our new function, and look at that, it does work. So we've got 3 here, which is fizz, 5, which is buzz, as we know that 5 is divisible by 5. 6, we know that 3 is divisible by 6, and it will have the 0 remainder. And if we go over here to 15, and it's Fizz Buzz. If you noticed here, this kind of really cool the way this we can kind of size this up and make it work. And that's part of our HTML and CSS. Pretty neat. Okay, so let's go on to the next one because there is actually a better way to do this. So let's look at the third way that we could do FizzBuzz. Okay, so now that we've done 2 methods to do this with the loop and we showed you using the dry method, a little better way to do it, let's look at a third way that can be what we would call the most shortest way to write FizzBuzz that we can find. And I think this method will show kind of your expertise in how logic works and how true-false statements work. But I would recommend that you learn this statement in addition to the other ones, the traditional approaches we showed before. So this would be FizzBuzz, the not traditional approach. So let's show you how to do the not traditional approach to FizzBuzz. So if you want to impress your hiring manager, then this will probably be impressive to them, I would think. So it's pretty creative use of how to do this. So I'm going to create a new function called FizzBuzz C. And it's going to take a value just like we did before, value 1 and value 2. And we're going to go ahead and create our return value that we're going to use just like we've been doing through the entire thing here. And it's going to be a string, and we're going to set it to empty string as its default value. We're also going to declare a loop. So we're still going to loop over this. So we're going to still do the same kind of loop. So again, I equals 1, start at 1. I equals, as long as I equals is less or equal to 100. And then every time we add 1 to it. So we've got our loop defined, and this is where the magic happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the return value, our string. So every time I loop this, I'm going to append to this string, and I'm going to do this. Now watch this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take I, and I'm going to modulus the value 1, just like we've been doing before. The value 1. I'm going to check to see if it's equal to 0. Then I'm going to use a ternary operator, which is a question mark. And this question mark says, evaluate this statement to be true or false. And if it's true, do something right after this question mark. In the case here, if that is true, I'm going to return fizz. Else, which is defined by a colon, I'm going to return an empty string. Okay? And so let's go over that real quick. We are going to say, hey, this value 1, the module of this value 1, if that equals 0, do add fizz to this return value string. If it's false, add empty string. Kind of cool, right? Then I'm going to add something else to the string. And I am going to create or check the modulus of value 2. My modulus 2. I'm going to use the question mark again. And this time I'm going to do buzz or empty string. And that's a ternary operator. Then what I can do, or, which I can put an or statement in here, excuse me, just give me I. And then to cap it off, at the end of every string that you create out of this, add a space on the end, semicolon. Then we're going to say return value. And that's how you do FizzBuzz in one line. So let's go over it again real quick. So we're going to add to the string, and this thing is going to get evaluated to I modulus value. If it's equal to 0, hit fizz, or if it's not, give me an empty string. If it's a plus, then add the value of buzz. Oops, I made it wrong here, equals 0. And then use a ternary operator and say if it's true, if this is true, add buzz, and then otherwise add an empty string, or just give me I, which means if both of these are false, then give me I. If one of these are true, it won't execute this statement, and then I'll hit a plus, and at the end of it, I'm going to add a space for my formatting, and I'm going to hit return value. So let's see how this works. So I'm going to change my function down here to FizzBuzz C, and we'll go live here, and we'll see if it works. Hopefully it works. Hopefully I did it right. All right, so let's check it out here. So it's compiled, and look here, we got our HTML that we've been working on all day, and we're going to hit FizzBuzz, and bam, there it is. So like you can see that 3, 5, 6 is fizz, and then we go down to 15 is FizzBuzz. So it 100% works, and on top of that, we did it in essentially this one line of code, which is all of our magic. And I think that this would probably impress a hiring manager. But just in case they're not impressed with ternary operators, or they think they're kind of confusing, you can also show them how to do it with traditional for loops and like FizzBuzz B or FizzBuzz A. Okay, so we've solved FizzBuzz 3 ways now, and I hope you learned a lot at this point. But what I'm going to show you next is what we call the MetaStrat, or the MetaStrategy to solve FizzBuzz. We think this is the best way to solve FizzBuzz to demonstrate your ability to win a job. What we're going for here is that golf clap moment. You know, the hiring manager's single tear down his eye, all of that, where they offer you the job on the spot because you showed this in a way that really demonstrates your knowledge that you can actually really code. So we're going to look at the MetaStrat, but if you stick around, I still have that one super secret hot tip to show you how to use FizzBuzz to win a job. So hang out for that as well, but for now, let's get coding. Okay, so to do the MetaStrat, what we're calling the FizzBuzz MetaStrat, we need to start out with writing a function. Okay, so this is our MetaStrategy or our MetaStrat. And so the first thing we need to do is write a function like we've been doing all day. And we're going to call it FizzBuzzD. Of course, it takes a value of 1 and 2 from our front end. And so just like that other one, but the difference we're going to do here is we're going to use something called an array. And an array is a list of objects that have values, and they're indexed by the number or the position that's in the array. In this case, we're going to have 100 items in our array that have a value of the number or fizz, buzz, or both. Okay, and this is how you define arrays, just like that. So this is an empty array, and I need a for loop, just like we've been doing. So I is less than or equal to 100, and every time it loops around, we want to add 1 to I. And so now we have our loop. What the difference here is, we want to set a position of the array and its value of the FizzBuzz value that it has. And so this is how we would do that. And this is how we access those indexes in the array. So we pass it I, and this is the index in the array that we want to set. And we say this index has a value of, and we're going to use our ternary operator that we used before. We're just going to push this here, make it plus equal, because we want to add to this array every time. Actually, we just want to say equal. And we're going to take off our formatting string, because what we're doing here is actually showing how to separate concerns. Before, we had this space or this formatting and all the functions previous to this. And now all we have is just the data. In other words, just our business logic. So we've separated the concerns from our front end. So there's no formatting in this at all. And then we hit return array. And that's it. So before, we were adding to a string up here, and now we're just setting the indexed value equal to the FizzBuzz statement. Now, the one thing that I want to go over on this ternary operator is explain something I don't think I was clear in the last one. So let's look at this one more time real quickly. So I've got the modulus value here. So I've got I coming in, value 1, and I'm checking to see if the remainder of that division process is 0. If it is, write fizz, else, this is the else statement here, create an empty string. So return an empty string. Plus, if I take the number plus value 2, and if that equals 0, give me a buzz, or give me an empty string, or else give me an empty string. And if none of that, give me an or, give me just the I value. Now I want to explain why this works, because I wasn't real clear before. If both of these have empty strings here, for example, if the first value comes in and we have 1, all right, and the user entered 3 and 5, so 1 comes in and it's a value of 3, the remainder of that is not 0, so it's going to return an empty string here. And I'm going to add to that string, and if I say 1 and the value 2, which in the case of the defaults would be 5, that would also return an empty string. Here's the hot tip. Empty strings evaluate to false. So this would be empty string plus empty string, and then it would say or I. So if you have a false or I, it's going to take the right side of the or statement, and that's how the or statement works. If I had fizz in the case of 3, and I just had 3, the modulus is 0, and I printed out fizz, and 3 would give me an empty string, fizz plus an empty string would evaluate to true, because any string that has anything bigger than empty string will evaluate to true. So in that case, it would be true or I. And in that case, it would take the true statement, which would be fizz or buzz or fizz buzz or something like that. And that's why that works. I hope that clears that up and makes it a little bit more explanation of why this ternary operator actually works in this case. So, well, let's get back to how do we use this array. And so what I'm going to show you is a little bit more complex way to display these, where we're not using just passing a giant string back to the front end. And we're going to use templating to be able to do this. So stay with me. I think you'll learn a lot here. So the first thing that we need to do is we're going to create a brand new HTML file. And we're going to call this FizzBuzz Meta. .html. Let's get my caps right here. There we go. So I've got a brand new HTML file. All right, I'm going to go look here. I'm going to take some stuff from the first one that we've done. Okay. And I'm going to add that into this file here. Cut and paste. You can do that. And then I'm going to change this to FizzBuzz the MetaStrategy. All right, and so now we have a different title. We still have all of our source files, or our script file is linked to FizzBuzz.js, and our styling is also there, okay? So I'm gonna go here and copy some more code here. So I need a body tag, and I'm gonna take this image here. I'm gonna copy that over here, because we've been using that all day. I'm gonna keep it the same, okay? And I'm going to end out my body tag, and I'm going to end out my HTML. Okay, so now this is where we're going to vary off of what we've been doing before. So the first thing I want to do is also add in, I need the number where I enter the numbers in, the label spans that we've been doing in the headings. So let's also grab that from our previous code here. So we're going to take this same rev style. I'm going to get the heading, a number, and I'm going to take my button. Okay, so that I don't have to type all that again. Again, you can type it in again if you want to. Let's get this lined up here a little bit. Okay, so now the next thing we need to do is we're going to add in a new way to display this. And what we're going to do is put this in a table. And what the table will allow us to do is separate it into 5 columns and rows and make it a little bit more stylish, a little bit more easier to read, and overall kind of a better UI, I think anyway. So how we're going to do that is we're going to have a div here. And I am going to use an inline style here just to for simplicity here. And I'm going to use the overflow so it knows how to wrap, okay? Not too terribly important here. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table. So before I used a paragraph tag and I was just putting a string to it, now I'm going to use a table. And I'm also going to give it the name results, just like I did in my previous paragraph tag, so that my JavaScript can find it. Now here's where it gets a little bit interesting, I think, is I'm going to put my generated results will go here. I'm putting a tag in here, a little comment. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to create some templates, okay? And I want to use these templates in my JavaScript to generate the results in the template and then place the HTML inside my table, okay? So here, I'm going to put another comment in here that the templates for displaying the output. And we'll scroll up a little bit so we can see what's going on here. And then so I'm going to add something called a script tag, okay? And I'm going to give this an ID so that I can actually find this from my JavaScript, okay? And I'm going to call this the template header. And then I'm going to give it a type. And my type's going to be text-template. Now this will be an unknown type. And so what will happen in the browser won't display this, and that's what we want to happen. We want it to ignore this script tag, and given it the type of text-template, it actually will. So the next thing I want to do is put some actual valid HTML in here, but since it's inside the script tag, the browser is going to ignore this. So I'm going to make a thead tag, which stands for table header, and I'm going to give it a tr and a TD, and I'm going to call span that TD for 5. So in other words, this table is going to have 5 columns, but I want this header to cross all of those columns, okay? And for this header, I want to say results for Fizz Buzz. And then I want to close out my TD. And then I want to close out Actually, this should be TH, excuse me. I want to close out my TH tag there and then close out my row. All right, so we're not done yet. We need to make one more template. So I'm going to make another script tag. And I'm going to give it an ID. And it's going to be template -row -items. Okay? And I'm also going to give it a type of the same kind, which is text-template, so that the browser will ignore it. And what I need to do in here is I'm going to make a row. And I'm going to create a TDs in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a placeholder value. And this is something that I made up so that it would be unique. And I just made this up. So value 1. Okay, and this is my placeholder. And I'm going to replace this placeholder with my actual values in JavaScript. So I'm going to copy that 5 times. And then I'm going to change this to value 2. And what I named this is important because this is going to be corresponding to the column that they're in. And you'll see how we implement this in a second. Okay, and so that is our templating. And what we're going to do, I'm going to show you how we can use this stuff inside of JavaScript. So let's go back. Now that we've got our UI kind of done, let's go back to FizzBuzz here. And we're going to write a new function. And we're going to call and use our template. And this function is going to be called BuzzItTemplate. And we'll also call it BuzzItTemplate. Just showing that we're going to use that, and so that's good enough. So how do we use this thing? So let's talk about what we need to do this. So the first thing we need to do is declare an output array, because the function that we wrote returns arrays, not strings. So we declare an output array, which is great. Let's get this spelled right. And the next thing we need to do after that is we're going to get our head template and our row template from our HTML page. So I'm going to get the head template, and that's going to equal the document, get element by ID, and I called it template -header. That's what I called it. And then I'm going to get the row template. Get element by ID. And I called that template row items. Now I'm going to go over here and make sure that I spelled these correctly. So let's look back at our code here, and we called it template -header, template -row items. Okay, that's how we got it. So what that's returning here is going to be this entire script tag. So like this is going to return all of this, the first one, and then the second one's going to return all of this in the script tag and all. What I want is just the HTML in here. So let me show you how we would grab that. I'm doing this in 2 statements just for clarity. You probably could do this all in 1 statement, but just for clarity, let's just do it like this. So like, so I'm going to get a template.html equals, and it's the head template dot inner HTML. And I'm going to get the results. I'm going to call this results, because this is what we're going to use to with our array right here. And that's going to be, this will be the row template. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get the head template right here. I'm going to show you why I'm going to do this in a second. Okay, so what I want to do is, for this line right here, I want to get the head template, and then this is the row template. And this is what I'm going to use to put the actual values in, and this is what I'm actually going to have when I return back to the screen, when I return back to my HTML. So what this has in here right now, if you look real closely, is it's got this right here, just this header. And so I want that only once, so I'm predefining that up front, and now I'm going to loop through and add these each individual rows in. So let's see how that would work. Okay. So the thing that I need to do is get the values that the user entered. It's always good to comment your code. Okay. So I'm going to let val1 equal to, and again, I'm going to go back to my document, .get element ID, and I'm going to get the fizz value, dot value, okay, and then I'm going to get value2, we'll call it val2 equals document dot get element, and I'm going to get the buzz value. Value. So now we've got the two things that the user entered, so that's great. And so now what we need to do is actually call our function and populate our output array. So output equals FizzBuzz D, FizzBuzz D, and we can pass in val1 and val2. So now we have our array. So let's put a comment in here. And now what we need to do is consume this array. So we need a loop over the value or the length of the array. So I need a loop. So for I equals 1, semicolon, I less than output dot length. Okay? And this is just going to give me the total number in the array. And that's what that function does. Because if the array length could change, it's in this case here, it's always going to be 100, but it could change if you wanted to do it, and this would allow you to take any value. So the next thing I'm going to do is, instead of incrementing by 1 like we've done before, I'm going to increment by 5. And what I want to do here is I want to write out 5 columns at a time in one row. So for each row, I'm going to get the next 5 values in it. So it's pretty easy. So I'm going to take my results.html that I've already set up, and I'm going to add to it. So now I'm building a string, and I'm going to add to it my template HTML. Okay? Now, the template HTML, when it's right here, is in fact this code right here. So every time I loop through, I'm getting this values right here. Okay? And I'm going to replace them. So let's go through that real quick. So template.html dot, and I want to replace, and I can use the replace function here. Okay? And guess what I can do here? I can take the value that I find in the HTML, and I'm going to say value1. If you remember, comma, output, replace it with output and the index of I. And I'll show you why this works in a second. And that's what I want to do. Kind of cool, right? I also can use something cool that where I can also replace more things in this as well. So when I come over here, and I can do more than one replace. And so I'm going to do another replace statement. And I'm going to replace, if you guessed it, val2. But what I'm going to do, instead of output I'm going to put output I plus 1. And that'll take me to the next row in the array. Pretty cool, right? So if I do this 3, 4, 5 times, and I get my values right here, 3, 4, 5. Okay? And then I make sure that my index get their correct index by saying, oh, I want to go +2. This time I want to go +3, and this one will be +4. Okay? And in all of that with a semicolon. Okay? Then I want to say document. After I've looped through all of my values, get element by ID, and I'm going to set the results, which is that table that we created, and I'm going to set its inner HTML equal to this results HTML. And that's it. And so what we've done now is we're now calling a FizzBuzz function, and we're using templating and using an array to hold our values, and then using a templating to replace it on the front end. And this is a little bit maybe a very rude way of some of the templating functions that libraries that you're using. Okay, so we need to do one more thing. We need to go over to our FizzBuzz meta, the HTML, and we need to change this on-click event. Otherwise, nothing would work. So let's change our buzzit template and make sure that we call the correct function, which would be good. We'll make sure that this is what we call it here, buzzit template. Okay, so we should be ready to show this now to see if this in fact works. So let's go live here. Okay, so I've got it over here, and if we make this a little bit bigger, you can see here we're hitting our new HTML page right here. So if it comes up and you're doing it, make sure you reference the correct page. And when I've got my 3.5 by default in here, watch what happens. Bam. And now we've got this really easy to read, nice table for our presentation on FizzBuzz. So we think that is probably one of the cooler ways I've seen FizzBuzz done from a presentation standpoint, as well as from the back-end coding standpoint. It's also a little bit responsive. So if we squeeze it down here, you know, it kind of does pretty nicely for squeezing in the results for us. So that is the meta way to do FizzBuzz. Okay, so we saw FizzBuzz 4 different ways. We showed you the MetaStrat, the one that we think can actually win over a hiring manager. But just in case, there's one other thing that you can do to use FizzBuzz to win that job. Here's what it is. Check this out. You can actually get them a card that says, "Thank you for your time at interviewing." You can also leave behind a can of FizzBuzz, and that's right. You can buy this at FizzBuzzEnergy.com, and this is an energy drink that we made here at Foundry. Yes, we know this is a shameless plug, but hopefully you can look past and listen to the advice. If you don't want to give them FizzBuzz Energy, fine, use Red Bull. But we think that this is a really deep cut that they'll remember. It's novel, it's kind of cool, it talked about the interview question and all those things. But in general, what you want to do is put this in your bag before you leave and just thank them for their time, handwritten note, and then leave behind a gift. FizzBuzz works, Red Bull works, whatever you want to do there. And just thank them for the time for interviewing and that you really want the job. This shows initiative. No one does this. So go to FizzBuzzEnergy.com, buy a 4-pack of this, give out one at your interview, win the job, and drink the other 3. But whatever you do, We hope you learned a lot today, and good luck and keep coding.